There are several factors one must consider when deciding whether to do all of the project work internally or to potentially outsource some of the work to a vendor. The most important factors are the internal availability of resources, cost, and time. For example, if the budget is a project's key constraint, a decision to outsource will be based largely on which option is less expensive. You should also evaluate the risk, competency, and ethics of your prospective vendor. Regardless of price, you would never work with a vendor who had multiple safety violations, wasn't capable of doing the work, or demonstrated questionable ethics. When evaluating the cost of doing project work internally versus purchasing services or products from outside sources, you may perform a make or buy analysis. And if you decide to buy a product rather than make it in-house, there's often a second decision to make. Should you buy or lease? The main factor to consider in a buy or lease decision is for how long you will use the product or equipment. If you'll use it for just a specific project or for a short period only, it's probably better to lease. The amount of time at which leasing and purchasing costs will be equal is called the break-even point. If you decide to outsource part of your project work, you should create a procurement statement of work, or PSOW. The PSOW is carved out from the statement of work for the entire project. It is a description of just the product, service, or result that will be procured under a specific contract. The purpose of the PSOW is to enable prospective sellers to prepare and submit appropriate offers. It must be detailed enough so that prospective sellers can determine whether they'll be able to meet the requirements. It's helpful to note that when conducting procurements, your role is the buyer and your vendor is the seller. Procurement documents are used to solicit responses or bids from prospective vendors. You should structure procurement documents to facilitate accurate and complete seller responses and easy evaluation of these responses. Types of procurement documents include a request for information, which you use to learn the capabilities of prospective sellers, an invitation for bid, which is used to solicit competitive prices from prospective sellers, a request for quotation, in which the buyer asks the seller to supply the price for a simple commercial product or service, in which the buyer's requirements are more complicated but still clearly defined and a price is a sufficient response, a request for proposal, in which the buyer invites the seller to submit a proposal for completing the specific work, and a purchase order, which is a type of unilateral contract from the buyer to the seller, indicating to the seller that the purchase has been approved. There are 3 stages of the seller selection process, namely the invitation stage, the evaluation and selection stage, and the contract signing stage. During the invitation stage, you may perform advertising to quickly generate a wide selection of potential sellers. After receiving sellers' responses, you may hold bidder conferences. The aim is to ensure that all prospective sellers have a clear understanding of the procurement process and that every bidder is given an equal chance to bid on the contract. Next comes the evaluation and selection stage. The buyer will distinguish between the various bids. You may use an independent estimate as a benchmark against which to measure the costs proposed in each seller's bid. Any bid that is significantly higher or lower than the costs predicted is likely to be less desirable. You may then compare bids across all of the vendors. Most companies rely on the expert judgment of people with the experience or specific knowledge in one or more fields of relevance to the project. Proposal evaluation techniques often use a scoring system that is aligned to the source selection criteria. One popular scoring tool is the multiple criteria decision analysis, which weighs multiple factors and tallies an overall score for each prospective vendor. The final stage in the process of selecting sellers is the contract signing stage. This may begin with a letter of intent to the selected vendor. This is a courteous way to congratulate the vendor and inform them that they have been selected. Both the buyer and the seller may also enter into a memorandum of understanding, which both parties intend to respect and follow, but it is not legally binding. A formal contract may begin with procurement negotiations. This helps to clarify the details of the contract and finalize the terms of agreement so that the proposed contract is acceptable and achievable for both parties. The contract should address and accurately reflect all agreements reached, and it should document the responsibilities of all parties, such as the procurement statement of work, who has the authority to make changes, terms and conditions, service level agreements, warranties, legal ramifications, non-disclosures and information, privacy, financing, property rights, schedule, and price.